Welcome back, guys. With us, we have Samuel Tier, creator of Vita, Assembly Required, an all-ages graphic novel. Why don't you tell us just a little bit about, what the book's about and just, kind of what your idea was with that?
So it's a bit like the Jungle Book. It's about this girl, Vita. She lives in a factory. She's raised by assembly machines. And the machines, they teach her to build and repair things. But there's also a gremlin that lives in the factory. And the gremlin teaches her to destroy things. And Vita finds herself a little seduced by the gremlin's way of doing things. And as she does, she starts, kind of growing gremlin scales and sort of turning into a gremlin a little bit. And then she has to make this choice about where she feels like she fits in. Is she more like the gremlin or is she more like the assembly machines?
So doing an all ages book, for my podcast, way not all ages. so way not safe for work. Did you feel like it was restricting to work within the confines of not, having anything graphic within your book?
No, not really. I mean, we set out to write this story, and it opens with Vita's mother dying in an industrial accident. So we start with a death 3 pages in, and
very Disney.
Yeah, and it's kind of an intense death. It's not graphic, but it is very intense. Yeah, So no, I at no point did I ever feel restricted by it. Every once in a while, editorial would be there was a scene that we cut that there was the gremlin was choking the character, and they were like, we just don't like that kind of thing. And I was like, okay, it's fine. It's not really super important to the story. We can just tweak it and make it this thing instead. And they were like, oh yeah, that works much better. So
when when you created this kind of Jungle Book idea, little kid raised by machines, how do you try to impart basically parentage into a machine? How is it that a machine has the ability to raise a person?
It's very metaphorical, I guess. I grew up in a household where my dad was deaf, and he was a maintenance worker, and my mom is a first generation immigrant. So we had 2 different languages in the house. So my dad did sign language and my mom did Spanish. And then there was that kind of blue collar lifestyle that kind of came in. And so it was really easy to go, okay, well, the machine is going to take care of her, because it was about, it was the notion of a hand. It's, it's just that claw hand. And you're sort of, you have that same sensation of your dad kind of patting you on the shoulder or patting you on the head. And that was sort of getting that idea across. So that was kind of the idea of okay, the machine's going to be the mother or the dad for the character. And then again, going back to the whole Jungle Book thing, you needed something in that environment, and the only thing that's in there are machines. And then we later on came upon the gremlin idea, and we're like, hey, well, this is what works. This is our Baloo. This is our Bagheera.
How do you feel being the child of a first generation immigrant has really informed your work?
It's that being that makes me mixed race.
Me too.
So it makes you a perpetual outsider. I don't actually do sign language or Spanish really well, so I am an outsider in most of those communities. So you become very observant because you're just watching people and looking for ways to figure out how you blend. So I think that that observation then translates into how to write characters, because you see how people act. You see responses and patterns and things.
So when you're observing the world, you're looking at all these different aspects and the different, like you said, the deaf community and I'm sorry, I didn't catch, your mom was Hispanic? Or
yeah.
Okay. Sorry, I didn't want to be
I don't think I said, I just said first generation.
Okay. So yeah, I hate that stumbling block, because I'm my dad's Mexican, my mom's Irish, but there's that point where you say, oh, hey, you're Mexican too. No, I'm from Guatemala. You don't want to make that mistake and feel like a dork. But
it doesn't bother me. My mom does not like it. She's not from Mexico. She wants everybody to be real clear about that. From Guatemala, but yeah, no, but I
my Puerto Rican friend, I like to call him Mexican just because it drives him nuts.
Yep.
So when you're in this kind of state of observation, how do you like process that? Is it just something that you keep in your head? Do you have a sketchbook that you keep with you? Like, what is it that you use to kind of document what you're going to use in your work from your day-to-day life?
It's just like a lot of it is just background processing. Like it just happens in the background. I liken it to Legos. Sometimes you just like when you're a kid, we didn't have all these Lego sets. Like you just had pieces and you had to make a car, or you had to make something that resembled a race car out of just random Lego pieces. And it's like that. It's just like, oh, here's these random pieces, and I'm kind of like in the back of my head, they're kind of connecting to something. I'm like, oh, this is a thing now. It's a race car. Now I'm going to take it for a drive. So
that's amazing. So I stopped at your table because your friend has drawn a picture of Jinder Mahal that says, "Don't hinder the gender." Are you also a wrestling fan?
Yeah.
So, how do you feel? This is such a nerd dork question, but yeah, this has nothing to do with your comic or anything. But do you, when you're watching wrestling, are there aspects of it that you like to say, I'm going to sneak this into something that I'm drawing?
So there's a lot of stuff that in my writing, if you look at there's patterns to wrestling. So especially in Lucha Libre, there's the traditional the high spot. The guy climbs up on the top turnbuckle, pauses for a minute, you take it in, and then he jumps, and it goes one of two ways. He either connects or he just bites the dust. And it's that sort of it's rising action. It's basic storytelling right there. And myself and Jim Rugg, the creator and writer and artist of Street Angel, or co-creator, of Street Angel, we've talked about this once or twice, that about wrestling informing storytelling, because that's what it is at its core.
I have a friend named Dan, and I'm pretty sure he listens to the show. I saw him yesterday. We were talking about stuff, and he had posted on his Facebook, I just got into Glow, even though I'm going to con tomorrow. I think I'm going to binge watch this overnight. And he got to the end of it, and he's like, wow, that's amazing. It makes me want to watch wrestling. He's an actor. And all I could think is, there's no part of this that you won't love. It's just the most basic, pure, melodramatic story. And I posted a couple things from the last few weeks, that specifically the Enzo and Cass breakup.
Oh my God.
I mean, it's just so perfect, right? Because you're so connected to the characters, and then all of a sudden they're not connected with each other, and you're like, oh, the feels. But but when you're writing and stuff, do you try to take cues from that simplicity of storytelling, or do you like to tell something a little more nuanced as you're working?
I think nuance finds its way into it. I like to go for simplicity, I'm telling a thing, and I like finding out when other people bring different layers to it. Readers come to me and they go, oh, this I got this from it, and I got a very a lot of people have said about Vita, it's very Dickensian. And I was like, that's cool. I never read Dickens. What I did is I read a lot of Neil Gaiman and watched a lot of Guillermo del Toro movies, who sort of were very into Dickens, and so it was synthesized that way. So I got it kind of almost regurgitated in an interesting way from them. So then but it's interesting to see how people bring their own, not baggage so much, but they bring parts of themselves to a story, and I don't have to create the nuance because it's already they'll bring it to the table.
It's almost like a lens. Each person is going to see it a little differently just because they have their own viewpoint. They have their own lens. It's interesting, saying it seems so Dickensian. Well, I've never read Dickens. There's so much media around us. There's so much information swirling around us that we input all these things that, I may not understand X, X theme from X writer, but I've input that because I've seen it through somebody else, mimicking it or doing that kind of thing. Do you feel like having so much information and having just literally anything at your fingertips, does it make it easier or harder to come up with something that's original for you?
I think it makes it's harder to come up with something original. But for example, when I talked about Vita, it's I go, well, it's like the Jungle Book, and it's clearly it's not a one-to-one, because we veer off. And so to me, that's the idea, is okay, I can take this basic kernel of a thing, and where do I go with it if I was telling that story? And like, so like that's where you don't come up with something original, but you find your way to originality more than starting there. And I think that's a thing that a lot of people who are creative like have a lot of starts and stops. They go, oh, this is like this, or they pitch an idea to a friend, and a friend's like, oh, that sounds like this TV show, and then people don't want to do it. And I always tell people, just keep doing it. You'll find your way to originality.
That's cool. Samuel, let our listeners know how they can find your book and just kind of find you online so that they can, look at the great stuff that you're creating.
Yeah, so you can get it from your local comic shops. You can get it at Barnes & Noble. You can get it on Amazon. I have a website. It's crapcatch.com. And you can go there, and there's like a 7 or 8 page preview. There's a link to buy it through Amazon. So if that's the thing you're into, you can go and do that.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate it. Sorry we missed each other like 4 or 5 times.
No, it's great.
But
Thank you for having me on.
Of course, it was great to have you. Thank you.